7 minutes to go. Good morning, everyone on the platform.
Morning, Chair.
implementation of health taxes, for instance. The health tax is part of a tool that is really working at creating a supportive environment. Because if we look at the health promotion levy tax that was introduced in 2018, we saw studies show that there was a reduction. Abantu baye behlisa indlela abasela ngayo i-sugary drinks. And also we saw industry really reformulating their products so that baza kwehlisa iswekile enintsi kokukutya. So i-health promotion levy works. And the health promotion levy does not affect employment as it is stated by the industry. But the health promotion levy really helps revenue in South Africa because ever since it was implemented in 2018, it raised about 5.8 billion rand. And if this health promotion levy was really taken to the 20% as requested by the World Health Organization, because now it's 11%. So World Health Organization is saying that it must be at 20%. So if the Treasury had really doubled the health promotion levy, our revenue would have had an extra 2 billion rand, and that money would really go to really creating this healthy, supportive environment. And also, there are other tools that the government can really put in place when we talk now of the policy and the regulation tools that the government can put in place. The first one is the one that that's in Tetilengayo, which is the health promotion levy. That is a tool that can be used. Another tool that can be used is the implementation of the front of package warning labels, so that i-product ayithengayo ayibone imxelela clearly uba le product is high in salt, is high in sugar, and is high in fat as well. So that is a policy and regulation that can be used. And another tool that can be used is really to raise the child support grant, at least imite the food poverty line, which is 624 rand. And also the other tool that can be used when it comes to what we recommend is really the tool of supporting the National School Health Nutrition Program, so that and especially in the marginalized communities is healthy food, which will really support them in their growth and their development. Because primary. And lastly, the recommendation that we recommend that the government treasury has to implement so that we see a very supportive food environment is the adoption of the basic income grant for adults. That will really help the adults that are taking care of abantwana, especially omama, which are the ones abapheka okwakutya barhalela ba abantwana babo batye ukutya okuhealthy. So that is it for today. I hope that our treasury will really put an ear and implement these policies and regulations in time. Enkosi, ndiyabulela.
Ndiyabulela, thank you very much for the presentation that is speaking to the vulnerable. And what is good about the presentations here is that you are also coming with proposals. Treasury has to look into the proposals and the members will engage in them, see how feasible that is. We're going to take the last presentation for the first session from SAB. SAB, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members of the Select and Standing Committees of Finance. Let me just put this in slideshow mode. As SAB, we have made a written submission to support our 2021 revised proposals to the fiscal framework and the revenue proposals. In general, the SAB welcomes the emphasis that the Minister has placed in his maiden MTBPS that says that South Africa does have long-standing macroeconomic issues of poverty and unemployment, and that's a substantial way. We also commend the Minister for highlighting that business remains constrained by the persistent obstacles such as electricity shortages, inadequate broadband spectrum, and red tape or bottlenecks within the process of establishing and continue to be a sustainable and viable business. The lack of progress, in particular in implementing these reforms, including increasing the competition in electricity supply, has continued to constrain business growth, including the growth and some of the viability aspects as we consider going into the future as South African breweries. Over the medium term, the government has signaled its intention to move expenditure away from consumption and crisis mode towards enhancing investment. In particular, in the statements made in the MTBPS, the Minister has acknowledged, Chair, that the public sector can indeed lay the foundation for this to happen, although this must happen in partnership with the private sector that has the ability to increase investment and create more jobs for the economy. Chair, I'd like to flag that in relation to the Minister's Q&A session yesterday, there was a sentiment that what is the government or what is National Treasury doing, in particular through Operation Vulindlela and other policy levers to increase and collaborate with the public sector, with the private sector in order to increase investment and job creating opportunities. We would like to reiterate the statement to say, and to also flag this question at what exactly is National Treasury and government in general going to do to create less bottlenecks and less hindrances to the opportunities for SAB and other industry participants to increase investments and job growth. So the macro fiscal position of South Africa stated by the MTBPS state that's the government's central policy over the next 2 years is to, of course, increase economic growth, broad-based economic growth, and to make sure that the public finances of the country is in a sustainable position. Our ask as SAB is very particular and very simple. When the entire economy has suffered during the pandemic and the beer industry has been particularly hard hit, we are asking the Minister to assess and create certainty in the excise policy in particular. We ask that it is critical for our business to continue to be viable, and in this way, we would like that the National Treasury consider seriously keeping excise adjustments at or below inflation in line with the policy that guides excise policy taxes. Our value chain will be allowed to grow again, Chair, and this will allow our businesses, small and medium, to spread throughout the economy and create the multipliers we know that the beer industry and SAB in particular can create once given the chance to recover and to grow with the rest of the economy. National Treasury in particular, Chair, has repeatedly stated that excise policy is only a guideline and that there are no implementation variables to allow us to create investments that are both in line with our business planning and in line with our costs. So in no way currently in the current excise policy framework, Chair, is there a means for us to plan our business costs or future investments because there is no clear transparency and certainty around our excise policy. And this goes in line with what I think the National Treasury Budget Office head has stated yesterday, that there are some structural reforms within the current economy that aren't related to costs, that aren't related to increasing budget costs, and creating policy certainty around taxes allows us to plan not only our costs, but also our future investments in South Africa. In particular, Chair, looking at the MTBPS and its contents, we would like to raise two issues that we would like National Treasury to give us some feedback on. Firstly, we have no categories have grown above 2019-2020 levels, except for specific excise duties. The fact that excise duties have not recovered, Chair, is a direct reflection of the fact that the beer industry is still reeling from the effects of the pandemic and have not yet entered the path of economic recovery. Secondly, Chair, we would like to raise the fact that the tax base for increases in specific excise duties has changed from consumer price inflation to household consumption growth. household consumption growth. This may decrease, Chair, the opportunity for the alcohol industry to plan excise costs, as household consumption growth is more volatile than CPI, than consumer price inflation, and this may make it difficult for us to manage our costs and to sustain our business in its current form. So what we would like to know from National Treasury is if the beer industry will be given a chance to recover via targeted economic and tax relief in the medium-term budget, so that we can still continue to participate through the fiscus by paying taxes. And secondly, the rationale behind the rebasing of specific excise duty taxes away from CPI to household consumption growth. In general, Chair, we know that there is a message in the MTBPS around economic recovery, and we have tried to suss out from the MTBPS what are the implications for the beer industry. So we have noted that the government's efforts to manage the pandemic has been to support households and vulnerable households and firms, and this has required increased spending in the current year, which will then be elaborated in the 2022 budget. SAB's position, Chair, continues to be that the beer industry is still grappling with the economic impact of the pandemic, and this has led to 161 days of no trade and multiple restrictions. Despite the challenging business environment, we have continued to participate in the South African economy, and early in the year, SAB announced that it will make a 2 billion rand capital investment for the South African operations earmarked for next year. So in this sentiment, Chair, we are still noting that we want to participate in the economy. We are still concerned about what relief we have received from National Treasury in the form of taxes and in the form of the Economic Recovery and Reconstruction Plan. We are still trying to sustain our businesses, both small and medium, across our value chain, and we therefore request that the National Treasury grant in the medium term below or no inflation increase in excise to allow for our sector to recover. In conclusion, Chair, we'd like to highlight that SAB has been an active participant in the parliamentary process related to the amendment of the fiscal framework and the money bills in general. We've also made several submissions to National Treasury as a means of addressing some of the shortcomings and gaps related to the excise policy, including the lack of transparency and certainty around the guidelines and how it has hindered us from understanding the nature and the rationale and the implementation of excise taxes. We still look forward to making fruitful engagements with government around excise, and we still participate on every platform that is afforded to us. We are concerned, Chair, that there is a limited engagement with National Treasury towards the 2022 budget because the timelines of the budget cycle have been pushed back. So we continue to push, Chair, for economic and tax relief from the government so that we can continue to be at a place where we can once again contribute to investment and growth as one of the key levers for pushing the country outside of the pandemic and into a space where we grow the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Banda. Members, the opportunity, please, by show of hand, indicate if you want to engage. I saw the first one, and I'll rely on you, Nkululeko and Alan, to help me identify the members.
For now, Chair, it's Dennis Ryder and Moletsane. That's the only two hands.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Honorable Ryder.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning, colleagues and everyone else online. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to be fairly brief. Mr. Johnson, my first question goes to you and relates specifically to your comments around the take-up. And first of all, let me say I welcome your presentation and I agree with a lot of it and the sentiment certainly in it. The one thing I want to challenge you on, Mr. Johnson, is your comments around the take-up of the loan funding from the formal institutions that were part of the recovery package that government put forward during the past year. And you said that the take-up of those loans, because the banks are risk averse, etc., there wasn't huge take-up of that stimulus, that portion of the stimulus package. I want to challenge that, Mr. Johnson, because when we saw the low volume or the low numbers that were coming through in terms of the bank-sponsored funding or financing. We actually found that it was actually not an issue of the banks turning down applications, but it was more a case of people were not applying. There were a low number of applications. So you say that the problem was from the bank side. The banks are saying that they didn't receive their applications. Mr. Johnson, I'd love you to give me some examples where people did approach the banks and were turned down for that funding. Because I actually think that a lot of the responsibility for this falls on the SMME owners themselves. I don't think that there were a lot of people making application, and it may be a case of people resigning themselves to, well, the bank always wants X, Y, and Z. I think that wasn't the case with this portion of the stimulus package, and I do think that people were just not willing to come forward and actually make the applications. So that's my challenge to you, Mr. Johnson, and I'd love to hear your response. To Mandla Mobi, yes, I think the reliance on grants is a sad indictment on where we are as a country still. I do want to, put in the caveat that I think at the moment our biggest export as South Africa is taxpayers, and we need to maybe think of a little bit of a different or a better way of funding increased grant funding or additional grant funding other than taxing the rich. I think that we're finding a shrinking pot of taxpayers in this country, and not only because of people emigrating or leaving the country, but also because of the fact that even those that were earning salaries before COVID are no longer earning salaries. But yes, I think that I share the concerns raised by many of your of the voices that we heard during your presentation. And well done on a slightly different take on a presentation. I thought that was good. The quality wasn't perfect, but I think that you managed to get your message across quite well. To Hila, Ms. Madikiza, I strongly support the sentiments of your presentation. I'd just like to hear a little bit more from the school feeding schemes. You didn't mention too much about how well those are doing and if they are having an impact. I know that many provinces have spent quite a lot of money on school feeding schemes, from the National Council of Provinces myself. I'd love to hear some inputs about on the ground how that's working. So if you can maybe fill us in a little bit on that. But then I think that the targeting of sugary drinks, I think, is a bit of a lazy response and taking the easy way out, if you want. I think that sugary drinks get a bad rap, and because they're an easy target, they get nailed, if you want to say it like that. But the prevalence of pap in our diets, I think that is one of the bigger issues, and the fact that we default to pap in many feeding schemes, because pap, I think, is a bigger cause of diabetes than sugary drinks. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that, or is that too unpopular a subject to go on to? To SAB, Ms. Banda, I think your presentation would have been much better received if you brought a few samples across with you from SAB, but I do understand that that's difficult in a virtual environment. I think that I agree with your call for planning and consistency from Treasury, and particularly with a request for a little bit of an acknowledgement that the alcohol industry generally, and I want to wrap you over the knuckles, Ms. Banda, and say you didn't have to only restrict yourself to beer. You could have spoken on behalf of the entire industry. I think the entire industry has suffered tremendously during the past, almost 2 years. And I think that the Treasury needs to take cognizance of that fact and certainly take it into account with the excise duties, but definitely in terms of the planning to have a little bit more open communication and to ensure that there's more certainty to some of the big investors. And I mean, here we're talking about SAB, we're talking about Heineken, we're talking about Distill, we're talking about the wine farmers, we're talking about a lot of industries. And the fact that, SAB is in a market that is evolving, and we're seeing a lot more craft brewers coming to the fore, And even some of those are starting to export now. So I think, yes, I thought your points were well made. Chair, thank you very much for the chance.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ryder. Ntate Mletsane.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mine, it's not a question, it's more of a comment to the Amandla.mobi. I've been listening to their presentation, and I'm sure this is the third year now I'm listening to them. This group of gogos, they've been sacrificing a lot to come to Parliament and to put their plea to Treasury. Sometimes they were even here in Cape Town to an extent of even struggling to get a place to sleep. They are from union buildings with one mission, just to say the government must give them attention and give them more to increase their grants. I think it's a high time now that the Treasury must take the gogos seriously, because they have done whatever they have tried to for years now to say to forward their plea. And the very same gogos, they contributed to this country while during their days of waking. They were paying taxes. So I don't understand why can't we, is the treasury just closing their eyes? Because they've been saying this for years now. The treasury should have been looking at this matter and saying at least to try and get some funding in order to attend to their grievance. So mine was just to say to the treasury, please take the gogos very serious now. It has been some years. They have been singing the same song for every year, year in, year out. Can they be given attention so that their plea can be given a serious attention? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Noxie, Honorable Abrams.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Comrade Dix. Greetings to you as chair and all members, and maybe just to appreciate the people who have taken the opportunity to come to or to participate in the program. For me, that is the first line of the government's generosity to make way for each and every one of us to express themselves so that we make known the challenges that are facing people in their different corners. Indeed, Honorable Moletsane. Okay. Indeed.
I don't know what happened, but you can continue.
Okay, thank you, Tex. Honorable Moletsane is correct to say that the gogos have been coming to Parliament, but Honorable Chair, I want also to express my disappointment because I am not sure what the people who bring gogos to Parliament, because one of the gogos did indicate that they were called to Parliament. And I'm not sure what is said to them in terms of promissory approaches. So I think we need to be sensitive in that regard, because no one is ever certain of what the public purse will be able to do. You know, secondly, for me, the fact that their plea has been communicated, I do not remember it. You know, sometimes, Honorable Chairperson, when you get an increment, it does seem to be a minute kind of increment. But if you think about it in the sense that you are not the only one getting it, You know, let's take the question of the 350s. The 350 is an amount of money that is below the living wage, for example. But it's an amount of money that government gives to millions of South Africans. And when you think about it, it multiplies and becomes a lot of money. I know that the plea here is for an increment, which is appreciated, but I do not want to look down upon the fact that when we were faced with a pandemic, the governing party, through its president, came up with this kind of unemployment benefit, which is a sign that the government cares about ordinary people of the country and does not want to see suffering in the process. So yes, I might not be providing answers, but I'm just flagging these things so that we appreciate the fact that we are not dealing with a government that simply ignores the people. We are here today with the stakeholders because we do have this hope that having listened to the people, the government through National Treasury will see what to do in the various areas. But I don't want us to despair if very little happens, so that we know that already a lot has happened. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Knox. Honorable Karim, you're next.
Thank you, Chairperson. Firstly, obviously, all of us in different ways, to different degrees, agree on this need for a grant. We also agree that 350 rands is not enough. So it's not like any moral or principled objection to it. In fact, Chairperson, as you know, last year, at least earlier this year, yes, let me read to you what we said in our fiscal framework report, right? It reads, while recognizing the economic, financial, and other challenges, the committee recommends that in view of the COVID-related huge job losses, increasing poverty and inequality, the National Treasury and the government seriously consider a basic income grant after the necessary consultation with the relevant stakeholders. We refer this matter to the Appropriations Committee to give further attention to. Obviously, in terms of the Money Bills Act that we passed, this is an appropriations matter. It's not a fiscal framework matter, although it's related to that. But secondly, obviously, civil society, they don't draw the distinction between what belongs to fiscal framework and what belongs to appropriation. That's fine, we understand that. But in our processing of the matter, we have to bear in mind what the law that we pass says. So it's neither here nor there. So in other words, just to assure them that we do have a standing commitment to it. And it is something that the committee, no doubt, unless it's changed its views since February this year or March this year when we adopted this fiscal framework report, will retain that presumably exactly as it is, or maybe add to it. But what we have to point out is that some 46% of the population now is getting a social grant. This is, by all accounts, the highest percentage of any country's population. It's sad that it has to be that, because people should ideally be in jobs, and it's not their fault that mostly that they're not. So all I'm saying is, the issue isn't that we disagree, nor do we think 350 rounds is enough. It's simply what we can do. Now, I hear the minister saying that, and I think it's true what he says, that, and we say it ourselves, it's not a decision for Treasury alone to make. It's a government-wide decision. Treasury can have its point of view, but ultimately, if the cabinet as a majority agrees or by consensus on this, then Treasury has to give effect to it. Treasury has to point to the possibilities and the limits of it. But the decision is government's. The decision is the ANC's also, primarily as the majority party in the government, but it's also Parliament's view that we do support it. This is something we might want to review now, but this is our standing position. So all I'm saying, Chairperson, is the minister's been talking about, well, if you want to continue this and have a basic income grant, then you have to give somewhere else. Now that's where the Appropriations Committee and ourselves together need to propose concretely where the money can be found. I mean, I don't want to get controversial, Chairperson, and nor have I thought it through, and nor do I have the stats before me, and nor is it necessary for me to have that right now, if I couch it like this. One area, for example, right, that we could look more carefully at is DIRCO in foreign affairs. How many people we have, how many missions we have, how necessary are they, and so on. That's one area I'm just taking as an example, Chairperson. But it's something the Appropriations Committee can look at, because that committee knows more about where money goes and what criteria is used and where you can move money around. So one of the things we could do, Chairperson, to take this forward is to see where we as a committee, or committees, the Appropriations Committee, in our case, in NCOP, it's both of us there and the same committee, but with Mr. Buthelezzi's committee, Comrade Buthelezzi's committee on the NA side. So that's what I think we should do. But people need to know that we're not opposed to this as far as I know. And until that is amended, that's our standing position. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Karim. Honorable Maswanganye, it's okay.
No. I'm okay with the comments of the colleagues, Chairperson.
Okay.
Thank-
Okay. I think I'm going to go back to the presenters to clarify where clarities were sought. But also from my side, I think these are serious matters that needs the attention of cabinet. Because I understand that Treasury alone cannot make a decision. They can recommend and take this, because this is part course that you need to apply your mind on as Treasury and take the matter elevated to cabinet after having checked where possibly can you intervene. But I share the same sentiment as Comrade Knox, that it might not be possible. We are not dismissive. We accept, we are with you, as you have said, Abokoko and others. You are really raising valid points, but the economic status of the country, will it allow us to do all these things? We are not saying these are luxuries or nice to have. They are very important, they are necessary, but it needs to be elevated. I'm going to request the presenters as they follow each other, and then thereafter Treasury to comment on the discussion. But my feeling is that the matter needs to be elevated to the cabinet. If you can also, comment on what I'm recommending. Thank you. We'll start with who's the first presenter? Who was the first presenter? SMME industry company or corporation? SMME.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Honorable Chair. And as the previous, let me just get my video on. Thank you for the comments and the question asked by the honourable member. I think that the question that we need to ask here is about when you mentioned that there wasn't a high uptake of people applying for the assistance. Firstly, I will get some examples if needed, written examples where people were actually refused financial assistance. But to come to the question about the low uptake, it all starts with the perception and the confidence in whether they qualify or not. So for example, if you miss a debit order, or you miss a loan or overdraft repayment, or you had a return debit order on your bank account, or you're behind on your bond, you are unable to qualify automatically. So the bank looks at and asks for personal information and surety too. They look past the registered entity straight to the business owner. So whether the business is in good standing or not, that is irrelevant. They look at the business owner too. So they look at that, and that will be the deciding factor. So for example, when the bank started their assistance to help people with their, with the bonds during the COVID pandemic last year, there was a list of qualifying criteria that the banks had posted on their websites to assist people with bond repayments kind of thing. But one of the first qualifying criteria is your bond must be up to date at time of application. So if you've missed a week, a month or two before during the pandemic, it means your bond's not up to up to date. Therefore, you don't qualify automatically. So when you read that, there's no need to even go further to apply or to get assistance, because they know you will be stopped right there kind of thing. So where many SMMEs are constantly refused financial assistance because they don't qualify, it is right or wrong. I mean, that they don't want to apply again. I mean, it's like they feel that why should they? Why must they go through all the effort, all the heartache and what they need to do to be able to get the assistance, where they know at the end of the road, it's when they look at their personal profile, they're going to be refused, whether that entity is in good standing or not. And the last point I want to just say, for example, no CEO or director, a board member of any large corporation or any state-owned enterprises, nobody signs personal surety for that company's actions. Yet, for a small business, it is immediately personal surety you must sign in your personal capacity, even though your company is in good standing and it's operating and it shows a track record that you are growing. And I think that is also where many people and many SMMEs fear, or they say it's a waste of time because we are not being assisted. The access to the loans that we need, the access to the money that we need, the criteria is far too high, the risk far too high. And that also hinders SME growth, because why must I sign for another 2 million loan if I want to grow my business with property, machinery, etc.? I've shown the track record, but yet I know if anything happens in the next 5 years, I am responsible for that 2 million rand. Thank you. Sorry, Chair, you must unmute.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And thanks for the responses, clarities. I'm Obi to clarify and give responses.
Thank you, Chair. So the first thing that I would like to address is the comment by Mr. Ryder about the reliance on grants. Now, this is the most common idea that a lot of people hold, that asking or calling on the government to increase grants will just create some form of reliance. And I think this is a very ignorant and irresponsible thing to say, because right now, a lot of people in South Africa live in poor conditions. The majority live in poor conditions, right? We're in a very bad economic state right now. A lot of people are unemployed, a lot of people are starving. If really people had other places to go or other places to, inverted commas, rely on, I do not think so many people would be calling and asking that grants are increased. Imagine going to a Gogo who is 85 years old, who relies on a grant to support her family, and telling her that this thing of wanting to increase grants over and over again is not going to work. We need to come up with other measures. Other measures like what? Because honestly, nobody wants to survive on a social grant. Nobody wants to survive on a 350. But because people do not have a choice, people do not have anywhere else to go to. This is the only place where they are able to make their demands and tell, our leaders, tell the government that please help us. So I really do not like that. And we as the Untitled community do not like that. And we would like to call out every single person who thinks like that to just sit and think about it, because it is very, very an unkind thing to say. Another thing is that Mr. Ryder said we must come up with other measures, right? So many times, like the Gogos have gone to the parliament to ask that their grant is increased. And there was a point where they were told that where will the money come from? Show us where the money will come from. So what we did as the Untitled community is we told the government to please text the rich, right? So there's a link in the chat box right there. Organizations such as the BJC, the IEJ, tabled concrete plans of how that could work, but still it is not happening, right? Billions of money are lost to tax havens and illicit financial flows. So basically, we are just being held ransom by the rich. We have over 300,000 multimillionaires in this country who, if they are taxed more, will not starve for even an hour or even a day. And another thing that I would like to address right now is, so the comment by Honorable Abraham about people feeling like promises are being made. I'd just like to clarify something here. So the Gogo mentioned Honorable Yunus Karim about one of the comments he made during our presentation the last time, right? So this comment is not putting anyone or putting Honorable Karim on the spot. The Gogos, they watch these things, they listen. So she was just saying that even one of you, stood with us and said, please listen to the Gogos, please listen to the people. And in saying that they feel like promises are being made by a specific person and are relying on that is not a nice thing to say, because then these Gogos listen, and when they hear somebody speaking on their side, they have hopes, and they believe that if somebody on a high caliber speaks for us, then it gives us hope. It shows that we are speaking and we are being listened. So basically, we are not saying that Treasury makes all the decisions and stuff like that. We are saying Treasury has the power to address these issues. Treasury has the power to consult those hit hardest by the budget. Treasury has the power to find the money and increase grants and allow people to live in dignity. And a lot of times it is said that other measures need to be found to help people. I don't want to touch the issue of jobs because it can be very controversial, but a lot of times things like that are said. We are saying that while people still wait for those measures to be implemented, allow them to live like human beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I now allow Hila, Ms. Ndaba?
Zimbini, yes.
Okay.
I think the two izinto ezizekuthi thina it's the school nutrition program. Yes, Siyavuma, school nutrition program is doing an amazing job. Like there are many children that are affording to the school nutrition program, more than 9 million, but we can do more. But the other thing that we need to look at is really monitoring those food baskets. Are they really healthy food? Are they food that will really support the growth and the development of children? So the school nutrition really has to be healthy, nutritious food. And then when it comes to the PAP-causing diet, my colleague will also add on this. I mean, there's really nothing wrong in really having PAP, but as long as it is like in a well-balanced diet, then I'll hand over to my colleague to add.
Yeah, and I think we just have to be careful with maybe stigmatizing individual family food choices because this is a system issue. And I think we need to have supportive mechanism to actually support people to afford, to make food, healthy food available, accessible. So I think it's important that we can deal with system issues and be in supportive of the families and people who live in South Africa who are living below the poverty line to access. Sorry? I think we have lost the chair. I think the chair was saying something.
I was saying we could not hear your part as
We are losing you, Chair.
Lost you. So
Chair, can you try and switch off your video?
Requesting that you summarize what you said. Or am I, Honorable Maswangani? Okay, am I audible now? Maswangani,
Yeah.
can you please check over? Yeah, am I audible?
Audible, Chairperson.
Okay, I was saying to Hila, the second response from the colleague there, I lost him. I don't know if you heard him. I wanted him to summarize what he said.
Okay, I'll repeat, Chair. I was saying we have to be careful with individualizing diet because the issue of availability, accessibility of food, it's not really an individual choice. It's a systematic issue. That's why we are proposing different interventions to support families, to support people who live in this country who are living below the poverty line to access and afford healthy food. So that's why we like, even PAP, if we have a good fortification program that is supposed to be there, PAP already has protein and starch, and if it's eaten in right portions, with the combination of nutritious, other nutritious food like veggies, it's not actually a bad product in on its own. So I think that's what I was raising, that we need a supportive environment for people to access and afford healthy food, and not always look at individualizing and stigmatizing the decision of individuals in terms of what people eat as a in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. SAB.
Thanks, Chair. I think we'll just use this opportunity to reiterate, and we thank Honorable Ryder for supporting our proposals and our insistence that firstly, National Treasury provide us with greater certainty and transparency around the excise policy framework and include us in the process of setting excises per year. In particular, we'd like to highlight that we're still an industry that is in economic recovery, and we would like some sort of proposal including low or in line with inflation excise adjustment in the medium term to allow us to recover across our value chain. Secondly, Chair, we'd like to highlight also that we haven't received the sort of economic and tax relief afforded to various industries and private sector players, and an excise break or economic relief in the MTBPS or in the medium term, so long as the knock-on effects of the pandemic still exist. We would like to receive room to recover and to continue to be inclusive, or included rather, in the creation of jobs and investment that Treasury in general are driving in the structural reforms message, including the Minister in what he said in his maiden MTBPS. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Treasury. Team Treasury, who's going to speak on behalf of Treasury or as a team Who's going to start? Am I audible, members?
Yes, Chair, you are.
Nkululeko, where is Treasury?
We invited them, Chair. I saw there was a participant here from the ministry.
Her
Oh,
name
yeah.
Oh, Cindy.
there's Henny Paul here. Let me just quickly.
Okay, she's no more on the platform.
I think he's checking him here, Chair.
Chair, we're
yes,
just
I
gonna
see
check
him.
him. He might just be on another meeting. I think he was dealing with 2 meetings, but I'll just contact him to come in as well. Sorry about that.
Okay, maybe we need to step to
Chair,
the.
it's Alan. It's Alan, sorry. Henny just posted in the chat group that he's having trouble with his connection.
Oh, okay. Is that Alan speaking?
Yes, it was me, Chair. Henny indicated on the chat group or on the chat that he's having trouble with his connection.
Okay.
So, maybe if he's online now, he can just log out and back in again. Hopefully that will fix the issue.
Okay. I'm proposing that we go to the second session and hand over to the chairperson, the co-chairperson, and Tate Maswanganyi. We'll be having Outer, Saika, and Kosatu. And then he will respond thereafter. I'm just thinking that maybe we might disadvantage other members, other organizations who presented earlier. But then we will need to have a word from Treasury. Ntate Maswanganyi, I'm handing over to you. Can you steer the ship? Steer the ship, please, Ntate Maswanganyi.
Chairperson. Well, hello, Chairperson. Comment.
Yes, Chair, take over. My network is troubling me now. Please.
Okay,
It's Saika, Outer, and then Kosatu.
Okay, I'm also attending to something. Let me ask Comrade Jandu to chair in the meantime.
Honorable Njatu.
Mhlekazi, where are you?
I think while he's still sorting himself out, I hope I'm still audible. Can we allow Outer to flag their presentation if they are able to share?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Outer, over to you. And Honorable Njatu will be facilitating.
Thanks, Chair. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning to all the honorable members and everyone else presenting. We appreciate the opportunity to be here as always, and I hope all the members and everyone here has been well. Just to give an overview of the structure, the content of the presentation, start with an overview and look at the key themes that we heard from the Minister. And we titled the presentation Actions Speak Louder Than Words, Chairperson, because there wasn't much new in the statement. And we understand that there is very limited fiscal space for anything new. And much of what I'll say here today, I think, would be familiar to the committee, to the committees, because the situation really doesn't seem to have changed over time. On the contrary, it's become more difficult. So the challenges of the context in which we make the presentation is really the difficulties we're facing: state capture, COVID-19, uncontrolled spending and maladministration. And In particular, Chair, I think the overarching theme is that we've been spending money without really getting returns for that expenditure. And I understand that's an appropriations matter. So we do look at it from a very high level, not going into too much detail, just focusing on the key things that the minister had announced. We agree with the statement very much, Chairperson and members, that reform should focus on improving competitiveness, productivity, and investment. And all these things should really increase employment. And the problem with that is we agree with the statement, but in practice, government has made different decisions. In particular, for example, SAA has been supported despite it being outcompeted. We've seen low productivity as a result of unqualified people in very important positions in the public sector, making decisions as far as procurement is concerned. And we've also seen the introduction of digital platforms, which COVID-19 accelerated, and that's welcome, but many of these platforms are very inefficient and costly, and just causing people a lot of frustration. That's, for example, auto, which is being rolled out in the rest of the country, but also driver's licenses, which have really landed in a very big backlog. And again, we concerned that there's nothing new to attract investment. There were no radical announcements except stated intentions to cap our debt, which is very important, but also to decrease the deficit. But there's no clarity on exactly how that's going to happen. What we did see is an announcement to increase public wages, and we're very concerned with the fact that there doesn't seem to be a proportional increase in performance and public service outcomes for that increased expenditure. So in closing, we'll recommend that there has to be a lot of trade-offs going into next year, and we hope to see those very significant trade-offs that'll be permanent from February next year onwards. To start with local government, honorable members, this is a very serious issue. I think we're all aware of that. The recent elections really reflect how people are feeling about local government and what's happening there. And we're seeing issues with basic service provision like water and sanitation. 23 municipalities are not paying Eskom what they've agreed to pay, and they are in full or partial default. We've seen SCOPA having to come in, which really shouldn't be their role as far as I understand. But provincial COGTAs and treasuries have not implemented Section 139 appropriately. The number of municipalities under administration appears to be increasing, but that administration and that intervention does not seem to be effective. On the contrary, in some cases, it's simply continued to worsen. And we do think there's a stronger role that provinces need to play, which they haven't been. And in particular, we're concerned about the minister's statement that political and administrative leadership has to really be the core of the solution in local government, but that's in many cases been the core of the problem in local government. So we believe that civil society and civic organizations and communities in general need to be a part of the solution. There's an enormous amount of wasteful and fruitless expenditure ongoing. So we believe that budgets need to be opened up for public scrutiny. And before, Chair, there's been statements that people aren't really interested in coming to public hearings in local government, that there's no uptake, that people aren't keen to participate. And I think the response was that if there was a perception that their participation could actually make a difference insofar as expenditure and budgets are concerned, we strongly argue that they would be interested in participating. State-owned companies, there was a statement that there would be no additional funding for this. However, more than 700 billion rand worth of SOE debt has been guaranteed by government, and the road accident funds liabilities, 73 billion rand of that will mature in the next 3 years. This includes, for example, Eskom, SAA, the road accident fund itself, SANRAL, and Denel. So the statement really said that guarantees with conditions for SOEs with strategic importance will still be granted, but our argument is that this still constitutes a fiscal liability like any ordinary bailout. And this is especially true because many of these SOEs are continuously failing to perform their mandates. Eskom is a brilliant example of that. That's really causing difficult challenges for businesses and for households on a daily basis. But we do welcome the announcement that there will be more private participation and investment in the rail and energy sectors. This is a long time coming, honorable members, and we believe that these interventions could have happened a long time ago. There was no political will to do this. And yet we are quite happy that it is happening now. We look forward to seeing that unfolding. Sunroll and e-tolls, a difficult matter, is always one that's been kicked down the road. 15% of motorists pay, honorable members, and the scheme has not been abandoned. And it's very perplexing to see how government is holding on to this scheme despite its failure. Around 10 billion rands worth of unpaid e-tolls has accrued over time. And at this point, it's become such a problem that Sunroll itself is saying that there's a need for a new road infrastructure funding policy. They themselves are stating very unambiguously that this is a problem that is causing disruption in their balance sheet that has to be resolved by government in a comprehensive and proactive way. We calculate that about 23 billion rand in total from various sources has been handed over to Sunroll over time since the inception of the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. And this would have been enough had it been put forward in the beginning to pay for the entire project. But this unfortunately now includes debt, which is still building up over time. We'd really like to see some transparency in how that scheme is being reactively financed. In terms of remuneration, which seemed to be the only significant increase, 20.5 billion rand additionally going to that, the minister stated that that might have to come from infrastructure expenditure plans next year, and this is very concerning. Our key argument is that capital expenditure should be prioritized to secure returns, to ensure growth, to ensure that there's more money in the public sector to spend on social care and other items that are currently being crowded out by debt. And we do really have a problem with debt being incurred to maintain current expenses, which give us no returns, and remuneration is the best example of that. We believe that remuneration should be calculated, Chairperson, not as a function of political negotiations, but as a function of what that service provides to the public. And where it does not provide tangible benefits for the public, we do not believe that there should be increases. An example of this is really the police and defense departments, where there's an enormous amount of the budget going to remuneration. These areas will actually get some more money. The minister said this is to fight crime. But at the same time, there's massive liabilities that are not being dealt with. And a good example of that is the fact that there's more than 50,000 claims pending as of March 2021, which amounts to more than 50 billion rand in the police department alone. So this is very concerning, and we do believe that this needs to be dealt with. Another significant expenditure across the board is the fact that departments and SOEs and their senior officials and managers and executives get enormous salaries, in some cases 5 million rand a year or more. And we do not understand how this can be rationalized in the current situation. We don't believe it can. In terms of debt and the deficit, this is really the essence of what the MTBPS seemed to be about, yet debt servicing costs will reach about 360 billion rand per year in 2024-25. And this is an enormous amount, Chair. I think it was made clear this is going to become the biggest expenditure item, crowding out everything else that government can do. Everything that's being asked for in these public hearings, government is becoming less and less able to do these things. And it's a massive concern. The temporary windfall in tax revenue is very much temporary, and I think that needs to be emphasized. We won't be able to provide this kind of support as far as I can see, without eroding our fiscal position further, because there's no guarantee that the windfall in tax revenue now will be sustained over time. So we think that tax abuse and evasion really needs to be clamped down, and we emphasize the former. We also think that tax revenue needs to increase, and I think this is quite clear, but that needs to happen without increased rates of taxation on productive economic activity. There also needs to be a clampdown on base erosion as an illicit financial flows, And we do think that sound fiscal policy, how money is seen to be spent on the ground to benefit people, will increase voluntary compliance with the tax people and companies are expected to pay. We also believe that the PFMA and the MFMA needs to be applied more aggressively. The mechanisms are there to hold people accountable and to claw back money that is stolen or misspent in the public sector. And just to summarize, Chair, honorable members, we believe that reforms are essential, they're urgent, but tangible, urgent action steps need to happen in 2022. We haven't seen those yet. We also think that local government doesn't necessarily need experimentation and new systems. The current laws and current systems just need to be implemented, and there are examples of that. We believe that those should become benchmarks for other municipalities that are failing in the country. SOEs and their funding should be transparent. We welcome a National Water Resources Infrastructure Agency, but there needs to be a regulator as well. We also welcome some private participation and investment in the energy and transport sectors, but some SOEs must close, chips, and this is where fiscal consolidation must happen. And on Sunroll and e-tolls, we urge Cabinet to take a decision on the future of e-tolls. We really think that the losses now need to be cut for some certainty in that company and for road users in Gauteng. And lastly, in terms of remuneration, we do think that that needs to be deprioritized down the road and that there should be compensation for good work done, not compensation for the sake of compensation. And this is especially true as we enter next year and the next 3 years, where there'll have to be significant fiscal consolidation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Hi, Chair. I just spoke to Honorable Njadu. He's also having problems with network that side. That's why he could not respond.
Can I continue?
Just a second, Sharon.
Okay.
Should we nominate a chair from amongst ourselves?
Hello. Mangwen, is Honorable Abraham there?
Yes, Chairperson, she was here. Yes, she is here, Chair.
Noxie, are you there?
I'm here, Chair.
Yeah, can you preside in the meeting, please?
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Can we get the lady who was about to present continue, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Chairs, and thank you, members. It's again a pleasure to be here, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Sharon Smolders, and I'm from the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. I'm going to be talking today about 4 things. I can get my presentation going. There we go. The first one is the problems, and you'll see our presentation is pretty similar to Ota's, and I will be using my full 10 minutes, so please bear with me with that. We know the problems, so we're going to touch on those very briefly. We're going to look at the promises that the government has made, but the promises that they've also broken. We're going to look at the amounts that should be in the budget that aren't included in the budget, as well as the elusive necessities of the medium-term framework that we see are missing. Now, we know before COVID hit, South Africa's fuel tank was already running on low, but thankfully the medium-term budget policy statement did say that our revenue forecasts looked much better, and they were. But the problem here is that revenue is not the problem, it's expenditure. As we can see, since 2009, expenditure has way exceeded our revenue that has come in. In fact, it's grown on average 8.8% per year, which is significantly higher than inflation. Now, the reason for this growth is primarily due to the public sector wage bill, but of bigger concern is that the expenditure, despite these enormous amounts that we are spending, this expenditure is not effective, nor is it efficient. The consequences of this, and we all know these, I'll go through these quite quickly, is that businesses are constrained. Electricity shortages, inefficient and high cost transportation, communication platforms, red tape for small businesses, as we heard in earlier presentations. I mean, just let alone from August last year to January this year, we've had over 900 service delivery protests in South Africa, and that's in a 6-month period. Over the last 7 years, that averages out at 2 per day. If we look at just those 6 months, that's 5 per day. Nobody would want to invest in a country with those kind of stats. Never mind the high unemployment, where we've got one of the highest rates in the world. As we've been talking about, and as Honourable Karim mentioned, we're sitting with social grant beneficiaries reaching almost 46%. That's including the COVID grant beneficiaries, but those excluding COVID grants are 18.3 million beneficiaries, and that's expected to go up to 22.6 million in 2040. Our education, we've been ranked second last in the world for the quality of education, yet the largest proportion of our government spending goes to education. How is this possible? We spend more than most of the developed countries on education, yet we have these kind of outcomes. Another concern raised in the budgets, the medium-term budget speech, is the aging workforce in our education sector, and this applies equally to our police sector, which is of serious concern. Despite all of this, and that might be one of the reasons why our crime in our country continues to increase, and this is despite the COVID lockdown. You'll see on the right, I've given you the stats from the recent released crime statistics that have increased, particularly in the contract crimes, the major crimes. So what do we need government to do? Well, we need them to fund crime prevention. So we do, as mentioned by Ota, support the additional funding for the police, but we urge those responsible for these budgets and spending by the police to review them to make sure that it is effective spending. And this applies equally for the law enforcement agencies because they do go hand in hand. We need to introduce proper consequence management for non-reporting of budgets, inappropriate budgeting or improper spending, especially on capital items. We need to the government to review the workforce to make sure that we have the right skills mix and the age demographics fit the purpose that we require so that we can deliver the services that are needed. And we need to introduce and enforce productivity criteria. Now, government has made a lot of promises over the years, and we're going to look at a few of those, and a lot of those have been broken. And the 4 that I'll be touching on today, the first one is the expenditure ceiling. Since 2012, government has promised to maintain expenditure within these ceilings, within these levels, yet we'll see almost consistently these expenditure ceilings have been breached. This year is no different. It was breached by 56 billion rand. And what's really of concern to me is that we've now gone and increased these expenditure ceilings for the next 3 years due to the additional revenue that we got in. But my understanding, this additional revenue was temporary, so I'm not quite sure how that works. But the questions government and Parliament need to be asking is, why are we consistently breaching these ceilings if we know that we can't or shouldn't be to ensure fiscal sustainability for our country? The next one where we've made a lot of promises is on accountability. The minister, the prime minister, the president mentioned that there will be performance agreements for ministers in 2018, and this will introduce more accountability. Yet if we look at the Auditor General report, as I say, year on year, it reads like a horror story. That obviously doesn't seem to be filtering down to the lower levels of government. So again, we urge Parliament and somebody to provide us answers to the following questions. How many performance targets have been met? What was the outcome of the 50 million rand incurred for a study on the revised performance management system that was mentioned in 2020? Why has consequence management not been implemented across government as recommended by the Auditor General? And has Parliament really actively been monitoring and holding account the failures by ministers in this respect? The third area where a lot of promises have been made, and I put them here, I'll go through them quite quickly, is on the public sector wage bill. First, they said they'll try and maintain the numbers, then reduce the numbers, reduce the costs. Yet if we go through all of these promises, what we actually see is that compensation has grown more quickly than GDP. And if we look at it currently or last year, compensation was 41% of our revenue coming in. This year, it's sitting at 47% of our revenue. So of the revenue that comes into our government, 47% is being spent on government wages. Now, that in itself would not be a problem if we got value for the money that we were spending, which we can clearly see by the problems that that's not happening. What is the reason for this increase? Well, we know inflation and increase in numbers are some of the reasons, but the most important one is that 40.5% increase. Now, if we look at it realistically, if we look at the average salary of a public sector employee, it's sitting around about 400,000 Rand per annum. Compare this to the private sector, where that is amounting to approximately 277,000 Rand. So that clearly highlights the disproportionate increase in these government salaries. We've also seen that government wants employee salaries to be frozen for the next 3 years. However, we can see, is that really going to happen? The compensation ceiling was breached by 20.5 billion Rand this year. And if the Constitutional Court rules that the increase in salaries is not unlawful and not invalid, then there's further budgeted costs that will need to be budgeted for that haven't been taken into account. And I'll touch on that a bit later. So again, what do we need the government to do? We need the executive, when they are negotiating these wage increases, to ensure that there is sufficient budget, and they need to get approval from the National Treasury before agreeing to any amount that will be paid. Sorry, I was muted. And we need to establish the real underlying problems with our matrix. Do we have too many employees in government? Is the incorrect employee mix? Are they unproductive? And why is there a lack of consequences for spending and performance breaches? We need to introduce performance measures to ensure the required productivity. We need to remunerate according to performance, and we need to show that we have the right mix of employees so that we can meet the needs of the citizens, and that that mix aligns with the strategy of the country. The third promise that is made, or the last one, sorry, is debt. So there the minister even mentioned that fiscal sustainability depends on stabilizing debt, and the way that we're going to do this is through controlled spending. Yet our debt increases from year to year, and that results in an increase of interest expense, as Ota did also mention. Now, the concern we have here is that we're using more and more foreign debt if we look at the repayments coming up in the next few years, and that will put us at risk for exposure to currency fluctuations, as well as the reduced weakening Rand. So the only way that we can reduce this expenditure is if we reduce non-interest expenditure. Now, broad promises have been made by government in this regard, but again, it is questionable whether or not they'll meet these promises. So what has the budget actually missed? What are the unbudgeted amounts that need to be taken into account? Well, I've listed a few of them. The first one is SARS. The Commissioner presented to Parliament last week, and he said that SARS is sitting with a 9 billion Rand deficit over the next 3 years. And we can clearly see that they need this money because their compliance levels are dropping, and that is sincerely affecting taxpayers on the ground. We also are concerned that they will not meet their GRAP implementation deadline of April next year if they don't have the required funding. So we do urge Parliament to ensure that priority is given to SARS when in the dishing out of funds, because they are critical to the functioning of this budget. And we urge the National Treasury to please address the GRAP issue, because a lot of unwarranted operations are happening because of this. On the contingent liability aside, at the moment, it's going up to 1 trillion Rand in 2023-2024. And the minister announced that no further bailouts for SOEs would be provided, but we've seen no action plan to actually address the SOEs that are sitting in precarious situations. For instance, the RAF is currently sitting with a 450 billion Rand accounting liabilities. We heard yesterday that the South African Police Post Office has a problem with going concern if they do not receive 9 billion Rand from government. What are we doing? Are these contingent liabilities or are these real liabilities? We need a proper action plan to decide what we do with these ailing SOEs and government entities. The Government Employees Pension Fund, as we stated before, there's a potential underfunding there of 8 to 16 billion Rand. We'll know more about that in January. The water and sewage, 193 million has been allocated to that. That is not near enough to fix the dilapidated infrastructure that we have. And that's just looking at the water problems. And water is way more critical than the lack of electricity. So this needs urgent attention. We do question the need for a new agency. We just really feel that what's there needs to be managed properly. And we cannot carry on because this is really a critical resource that needs direct attention. Then on to the local municipalities, the Auditor General said the financial positions of these entities are so dire that there is a doubt that they will meet their obligations. There's a cash shortfall of 50.7 billion Rand, but the budget only allocated 17.8 billion Rand over the medium term. Now we can clearly see that these departments are budgeting for failure If we look at the number of deficit budgets, and these were the figures released by National Treasury, for next year, we're looking at 135 are budgeting to make a loss. And the concerning thing is if we look at the actual budgets compared to what the audited outcomes are, the budgeters always seem to be understated. So this figure may definitely be understated. Serious concern in respect of the local government that has not been budgeted for. So what are we missing? What are the elusive necessities for this budget? And I think we've said this over and over. It's accountability and action plan. 2 seconds. 2 seconds.
Sharon.
Yes.
Try to round up.
I'm finished.
No. Listen, Sharon. Try to round up. I will give you a full 2 minutes to round up.
Wow. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. I won't need it, but thank you. So the action, what we're missing is accountability and an action plan, and an action plan that is subject to appropriate monitoring and oversight. Now, in order to achieve the strong economic growth that our country desperately needs, we need government and parliament to stick to their promises. And I want to end off with a quote from the chairperson of SCOPA, who said it, and it was this year that he said this: effective oversight requires the political will on the part of each individual member of parliament to use the oversight mechanisms and array of tools at their disposal optimally. I really urge each member of this particular committee to please follow his guidance, to use your oversight power to stop this inefficient and ineffective spending so that the economic growth can happen and that the country can get, or the government can get more income so that we can give the actual basic grants that these gokos that they mentioned earlier. Those are the ones that need it. Those are the people we should be protecting. Yet money is not being spent where it's meant to be spent. Please, I urge you, let's stop that from happening so that the money can go where it's really, really needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. You used my 1 minute and 4 seconds that I gave you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Can we have Kosatu should be next? Are we going according to the agenda?
Yes, Chair, it's Kosatu now.
Okay, Kosatu, over to you. Matthew.
Sure. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, honorable members. Just give me 1 second to share our presentation quickly. But yes, good morning, members, and thanks, Chair, for giving us space as Kosatu just to share our views. And I'll just try to focus mostly on our key concerns and our key proposals as well, because of time constraints. I think the number one issue, Comrade Chair and members, is that as COSATU, we take a bit of a holistic approach to the MTBPS. I think number one is for us that we are in the deepest recession in a century. We have an economy which is limping in badly need of stimuli. And of course, as workers, we're very concerned about an unemployment rate of 44% and rising every quarter. And I think as previous colleagues has mentioned, we have millions who are now dependent, 27 million on the state for grants. We also have thousands of companies collapsing and in danger of collapsing. We have a fiscus which is bleeding billions to, as we know, to corruption, to wasteful expenditure, to tax evasion, to mismanaged SOEs and municipalities. And of course, we also have collapsing SOEs and a very unreliable energy supply. We do share government's concern about the dangerous debt trajectory, but I think also workers and the public at large are also exhausted by the state of the economy and the state of governance. Chair, I think where we differ with government is about how to address these issues. I think we feel government is mostly focused on austerity, for lack of a better terminology, approach. We think we need a more nuanced and a stimulus approach. And the budget is largely silent on the need for a stimulus plan. It's essentially focused on budget cuts through a wage bill freeze and across the board departmental budget cuts. We think there is a danger of simply focusing on austerity at all costs versus plugging the holes and stimulating the economy. We would have really wanted to see a mass stimulus program to kickstart the economy, in particular key growth sectors, and to include funding from the DFI's